Hello, everyone. So we're going to get into the skeletal system. It's not just about bones, it's bones, joints, and movements. So let's take a look. Let's see. So, functions of bones in our bodies. Bones are very alive. They're made out of living tissue, so they can grow. If they break, they can heal themselves. So those are just some examples, but we have a lot of functions of bones. Types of body movements. Yes, how could we tell male from female pelvis? Fractures, so we're talking about breaks and types of breaks. Terminology, medical words, drugs, diagnostic lab testing, abbreviations. So those are the learning outcomes. All right, so anatomy and physiology. So our skeleton's made out of 206 bones, give or take. Some people have a little bit more, some people have a little bit less. So when you think, usually like Halloween time, we think of dead things, right? But again, in our body, our bones are very alive. Well, what's going to hold bones together? Cartilage is on the ends of bones that helps with cushioning between bones. Tendons and ligaments, they're going to help hold bones together, right? Tendons help hold muscle to bone. Ligaments hold bone to bone, okay? So, axial skeleton, appendicular. Axial, we're talking about the axis. We're talking about in the middle. So the skull, vertebral column, rib cage. Appendicular, we're talking about the bones of the arms and the legs. So appendicular, prime bones, shoulder girdle, arms, hands, pelvic, legs, and feet. So here is a picture of the skeleton. So they have it labeled, yes. So some of the things that are labeled, so you have your skull, you have your vertebral column, rib cage, that's the axial skeleton. Appendicular is over here. So humerus is your arm bone, radius and ulna are your forearm. Radius is next to the thumb, ulna is next to the pinky. So if you rotate your hand, right, these are these two bones right here. Carpals, we're talking about your wrist. Metacarpals in your palm in your hand. And phalanges, those are your fingers, okay? Here, when you look at the rib cage, this is cartilage. The blue is cartilage. That's what helps attach the bones to the sternum. Here's the pelvis. The pelvis is actually made out of 3 bones. Now, here's the femur. The femur is your longest, strongest bone in your body. The patella, that's the kneecap. Here's the tibia, here's the fibula. The tibia is like your shin bone, and here's your fibula. Now, the hand bones are very similar, the foot bones are very similar to the hand bones. In the wrist, they're called carpals. In the ankle, they're called tarsals. In the hand, they're called metacarpals. And the foot, they're called metatarsals. And the finger bones are the phalanges in the hand and in the toes. So this kind of gives you an overview of the skeleton. So function, if we think of what's the function, so if I go back, skull, what does your skull do for you? Protects your brain, yes? Your rib cage protects your heart, your lungs, yeah? That's just one function, okay? It says provide shape, support, framework, yes? So yeah, absolutely. Without our skeleton, we'd be a blob on the floor, yeah? So we need that. Protection, yes. Storage space for minerals. You hear about calcium and phosphorus, right? Like eat your calcium, it's good for your bones. Well, your bones will store that. An important role in hematopoiesis. Now you're like, what are they talking about? They're talking about blood, right? Blood cell formation. So you have stem cells in your bones, and they're stem cells to make blood cells. Attachment for skeletal muscle, help with movement, with articulation. Articulation, we're talking about the joints where bones meet. So, between your humerus and your radius and ulna, there's the joint, your elbow joint, and that's for movement. So cartilage is a different type of tissue. It's soft, and it helps with cushioning between bones. Again, tendons attach muscle to bone. Ligaments attach bone to bone. And if you look, right, we talked about histology tissues. So tendons is connective tissue. Ligaments also connective tissue. Bones are actually connective tissue too. So bones made out of water, solid matter called osseous tissue, right? So if you hear the word osteo, we're talking about bone, like osteoblasts, osteoclasts. Yeah. So in the beginning, bones are not bones yet. They're actually made out of cartilage, and then they become bones. So it says bone forming cells are osteoblasts. Those are bone forming cells. And then, right, and then we go from cartilage to bone. Yeah, they're talking about there's blood vessels going through bone. Yeah. We grow for a while, and we continually make and form and reabsorb, right, stuff from bone. Now, types of bones, shapes of bones. Most bones you're familiar with are long bones, right? Sorry, I was looking at the time. Long bones, right? So femur, radius, ulna, yes, those are long bones. But we have other shapes too. In the skull, they're flat bones. In our vertebral column, they're irregular, right? Because it's like they're flat, they're pointy, yeah. Sesamoid bones, kind of that irregular shape. Short bones, so in the wrist and in the tarsals and the carpals, right? Suture is a joint between bones, and sutures come in joints have 3 classifications. So classification bones, so whether it's flat, long, the long are the ones you're familiar with usually, short, irregular, sesamoid, patella, the kneecap. All right. So the structure of a bone, this is talking about the different structures. It really helps to look at a picture. So here's a long bone, diaphysis, that's this part. Epiphysis or epiphysis is the ends, right? And in a long bone, there's compact bone, and then there's spongy bone. There's a medullary cavity, that's a space. And there's bone marrow, right? You have yellow bone marrow that's primarily made out of fat. We have red bone marrow. Red bone marrow's made, is found in the spongy bone, and that's going to be the one that makes the blood cells. Right, epiphyseal plate here, the epiphyseal plate, that is where bone growth happens. So in kids, bones growing here, and sometimes kids break their epiphyseal plate. If that happens, then their bones aren't going to grow properly. Okay, so bone markings. Yes, bones are not just smooth structures. They have markings on them. And so they have roles. It says in joining bones together, places for muscle attachment, passageway for blood vessels, ligaments, nerves. So there are holes and so on. So if we took an anatomy class, you would actually be looking at bones and you'd see all those structures. So parts of the bone, condyles, these big kind of projections are the condyles. Crest, fissure, foramen, that's the opening. That's kind of an important word you hear all the time. Fossa, a little shallow depression. Head, meatus, process, spine. Sulcus, trochanter, like you hear that with the femur. Tubercle, tuberosity. So these are extensions or openings or depressions in bone, and we get names for those. All right, now joints. The word joint is a place where two bones meet, right? And it says it's an articulation where two or more bones connect. And there are 3 principal types of joints, okay? And it's based on the movement, okay? There are immovable joints, there are slightly movable joints, and there are freely movable joints. So when you think about your elbow or your knee or your shoulders, those are freely movable or synovial joints. The joints in our skull, those are immovable. So it shows the knee joint. So if you look, here's the bone, right? So the compact bone here, the spongy bones here, the medullary cavities here. Here is cartilage, right? Articular cartilage. So the soft part, you guys are already familiar with this. If you guys, okay, this is going to sound really gross, but I'm going to say it. If you eat chicken, right? Let's say the meat is the muscle, right? On the ends of the bone, there's cartilage, that white kind of spongy stuff. That's cartilage, right? So we have that too. If you look, like here's the muscle, here's the tendon, here's the kneecap because they're showing the knee, right? Yeah, and so this has a certain type of movement. It's a hinge joint. It only moves in one plane. Yes, things happen to our joints when you hear about arthritis. You know, there could be bone growth. The joints don't move as quickly, as easily. It says diminished viscosity of synovial fluid, degeneration of collagen, elastin, outgrowth of cartilaginous clusters, scar tissue. These are age-related joint changes, and that's why, you know, when people get older, they have a harder time moving. Movement is really important. Exercise is really important. It helps lubricate the joints. Osteoarthritis from years of accumulated wear, tear on the joints, happens in hips, knees, fingers, if you've ever seen that, which I'm sure you have. All right, so types of joints. So synarthrosis is the same as the immovable. Amphiarthrosis are slightly movable. Diarthrosis or synovial, those are the freely movable. So in your book, so synarthrosis you can think of in the skull, right? Yeah. Amphiarthrosis cartilaginous you could think of like between the vertebrae. Diarthrosis or synovial you can think of like the freely movable. So your elbow, your knee, your shoulder. Now types of movement. Okay, joints and movement. Abduction, adduction. Think of adduction like you're adding. So if you're moving closer to the body, that's adduction, like you're adding. When you're moving away, abduction. Okay. Circumduction, dorsiflexion, right? So we're moving around or moving with our foot. It really helps to look at a picture, and they have pictures in the book. Flexion, extension. If we say, you know, flex, that's flexion. Extension is the opposite. Inversion, eversion, right? The types of movements there. Pronation, protraction, retraction. Yeah, again, they have pictures of that in your book, which really helps. Let me see. Rotation, supination. So here are some examples, right? So flexion, this would be flexion. It kind of decreases the joint angle. Extension increases the joint angle. If the joint is the knee, so this would be flexion, this would be extension. Circumduction, so going around, right? So we could do that with our shoulder. Abduction, adduction. Again, think of adduction. We're going in. Abduction, going out. Protraction, retraction. So this would be protraction, retraction, right? It says protraction, moving part forward, retraction, moving it back. Again, a picture is worth 1,000 words. Rotation, right? We're moving around the central axis, so you could see that with our head. Dorsiflexion, right? That movement backwards with your toes. Pronation, supination. I had a professor at school when I was in school. Supination. Think of how do you hold a bowl of soup? If I gave you a bowl of soup, you would hold it like this, right? So that's supination. Pronation would be the opposite. So supination, pronation. Eversion, turning out. Inversion, turning in. And we'll go ahead and stop here, and then we'll move on.